All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Ashley Bachaumard. It's June 23rd, 2025. We're at the Nicholson Library at Linfield University in McMinnville. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us today. First question, why wine?
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. Wine came to me through hospitality and love of food and people. I fell in love with everything hosting, and very early on would host parties, would assist my parents in hosting parties, and then that led to wanting to study food and beverage, and went to school. So I went and toured a number of colleges around the country that focused in hospitality. I grew up in Portland, wanted to get out and see what else was out there, and ended up in Denver. But before that, I think wine has always been there. When I go back and look at my life and look at the places I was raised and what was around me, at a very young age, my mom she's an architect, and she rented like a little corner of an office from Larry Farrar, who's a winery architect. And on Fridays, both my parents owned their own businesses and worked very hard, and so we were often under their desk and kind of tooling around their offices, and he would have blind tastings every Friday. And so it's one of those things where you look back and you're like, wow, that must have somehow lended to me. And when we would travel, we'd always go to goat farms and wineries. So around the country, around the world, that was like two main things that we always did. My grandparents lived on a vineyard, and I didn't quite realize, but I had family that owned wineries. You know, as a young kid, you don't notice this until you get older and start to realize. So it was always around, and became to me through first wanting to be in restaurants, wanting to take care of people, feed people, and wine is kind of a very easy transition. So it was always there, and it was something I studied, but I was through restaurants is kind of how I learned.
So you talked a little bit about kind of life before wine. There anything else from sort of before college that's of interest in your story?
Yes, I think a pivotal moment was my parents moved up here from LA right when they were pregnant with me and wanting to raise us somewhere not LA. So they were looking, landed in Portland, and they didn't know anyone. And so their first friends and community were my dad's clients. So he's an attorney, a real estate attorney, and a lot of his clients own restaurants. And so I learned very quickly that they had the most fun. They would come in, take over our kitchen, bring beautiful wines, and I started working in their restaurants at a young age and fell in love with everything to do with food, just small things like I was at Pizzicato was the restaurant, and so I got to work the line in Northwest and the front counter, and just loved making salads and putting pizza in the oven and feeding people. And that led to a joy of hosting, I mentioned that earlier, but hosting parties. I would do pretty elaborate themed mocktail events, and I actually had a food blog. I don't think it's up anymore, but it was called A Taste of PDX, where I would take a dish and try to recreate it, and at a very young age was also trying to make drinks that I shouldn't have been making and pairings. And I believe I got a call from my parents saying, hey, you can do this, but hold the tequila. So that was pretty fun. But I have always been I always knew this is where I was going to end up. I thought it would be restaurants again. And let's see, college happened pretty quickly, I guess. I went to University of Denver, studied hospitality, tourism management. Most of your education is in the business school, and then you start to take like focus classes. And I really enjoyed it. I met a lot of people, and one of my part of my studies, our capstone, was to basically develop a restaurant business plan and pitch it to local business owners and founders. And one of them, it was like a competition. We didn't end up winning, But one of the founders approached me after and said, if you ever want a job or any help, I'm here to support you. And ultimately wanted to introduce me to a friend of his who was opening up a restaurant. And I thought, I can't be an opening manager. I haven't had any experience. I've only worked as a host in restaurants or kind of entry-level roles. I can't be a leader quite yet. And so I didn't call him. And when I graduated from college, I ended up taking another host job thinking that was all I could do. And about a month into that, I was like, wait a second, what am I doing? I do have a degree. I can pursue this. I can do hard things. So I called him and had the interview, got the job, and started as an assistant general manager at a farm-to-table restaurant that was so exciting. And something that is a through line through a lot of the places I worked after college was wanting to be kind of the best and having this focus on high quality and whatever that was in that space. So Beast and Bottle was family owned. We did whole animal butchery, and it was so exciting to be on a team that just every day woke up wanting to get the best clams. They did a lot of the fishermen to dock. I was often going to because we were in Denver, we didn't have a lot of oceans around, obviously. So we would go to the airport, and I would have like kind of live fish that was on dry ice in my back of my car. And then another part of my job would be driving out to Boulder to go grab, fresh produce from. It was just really committed and like dedication to where things were coming from. And it was at that job that I really fell into wine. And I had already taken a couple wine courses and knew a little bit to be dangerous, but being around, there's nothing beats a restaurant that does pairings, and you have wine people coming in every day pouring you wine, sales reps, and I started in the Court and Masters and really enjoyed studying and taking that test and kind of diving into the educational, and the culture around the tasting groups is so much fun. It's so special to be an adult and studying, and like we would actually go back to our school library even though I was already graduated because I needed that like study environment, drawing maps. There's so much fun there. So while I was working there, I learned it was an incredible experience, an introduction to how to run a business successfully, how to market, and we were such a small team that I got to touch every aspect of it, from creating new training manuals to doing inventory to running social media to how to design a menu. I touched on whole animal butchery, and something we did, we'd serve like the whole pig's head, which was like quite a dramatic experience. We'd do a tasting menu, but we were no white tablecloths, and so it was this really high quality food, but none of the stuffiness, which was so fun to just like get right with people. And I was the tiniest little jewel box of a restaurant that was so much fun. My office was a cloffice. It was a closet that I could not even fully step in. I had to leave the door open, and I would run micros like on this little computer, and it was heaven. I really loved it. And I probably would have still be there today if hadn't happenstance. A woman walked in when we were closed. Everything was flipped up like on the bar, and she came in and read about us in Food and Wine and was really excited to try our food. No one was there. There was no food, but I made her a cocktail and grabbed some bread and butter, and we chatted, and it turned out she was from the French Laundry and wanted, after our conversation, was like, you've got to come to Napa. You're in the wrong place. So that was a big pivotal moment for me. And I met with, she introduced me to the GM, Michael Manillo, and her husband at the time was at Bouchon. And so she was like, I don't know where you'll end up, but you got to come work for us. And it was an amazing experience coming out there and talk about white tablecloth. It was very different having to show up. My clothes were all so wrinkly from driving up that I realized I couldn't wear any of them. And so I had to pop into a store in Yountville able to get something that was appropriate because my it was so hot. It was like 90 degrees and everything. I just didn't feel appropriate walking in. It was quite funny. But working there was the ultimate experience of working from the ground up. I think I was 25 and being at AGM and they offered me to become a partner at the restaurant before I left and to be a GM, and they were going to start opening other projects. It was a very humbling experience to become a food runner and to start, doing dishes and cleaning the floor and basically starting over again. And I thought it was so good for me because every 25-year-old should be told to go clean a floor and do some laundry. It was really good. And I learned the through line was the commitment to quality and respect for the purveyors. That was something that I immediately fell in love with. Was one of my first things in training was I got this beautiful purveyor book, and it had these gorgeous stories and photographs of everyone from one of the neighbors who has beautiful one walnut tree on her property, and it makes these beautiful red walnuts. I didn't even know that existed. They're like red and white, and they are stunning, and it's like Cindy's walnuts. And she's in there in her story and how Chef met her, and it was K&J Orchard is another example of that, where he is a dentist by trade and just happens to has like a very small orchard. And I think the legend has it that it started off with people, he worked in San Francisco and he had this gorgeous orchard, and the chefs from the French Laundry would kind of look over the fence and be like, oh, this fruit is just hanging there. No one's eating it. And they would kind of go taste it and fell in love with it, and then it became building a relationship. And he really thrived, and he would have like one of a certain varietal of a tree. And so it was really special to work in the environment where you could have one walnut tree and only serve those walnuts one night and make it really special and something we all remembered and honored. And I thought it was so cool to see a chef that had reached such success and have so much respect for even the smallest purveyor that we only worked with for a short amount of time. And working in that environment with that caliber was like a big wake-up call. I think another funny story is part of, now I'm trying to remember, I went to the National Restaurant Show. I think this was back in college, and I was trying to figure out if I should go to the Culinary Institute of America or go work. The timeline is kind of fuzzy now, but ultimately I stood in a line to meet Anthony Bourdain. We were the last people. People in front of us had gone out too hard the night before. They had to leave. They gave us their tickets. We got to go meet him. So it was like happenstance that we got to meet him, and I got to ask Anthony Bourdain, should I go to the Culinary Institute of America or should I go work in restaurants? And he was like, nothing is like getting that experience working on the line. Like, you can go get all the education in the world, which is the opposite of what I've been told, because my parents are so education. Being an architect and an attorney, they're very like, education is everything, which it is very important. But that in hospitality, there's nothing that beats real world experience. And so that was like a really good piece of advice for me to learn, and obviously someone that was kind of impacted my life and a lot of people's lives in the industry. And I think I've had a lot of people that have sort of like followed and been mentors without me ever actually getting to meet them. Another one, Danny Meyer, someone which we all, I think, are obsessed with, or maybe it's just me, I don't know. But at a young age, I got to eat at his restaurant, Union Square Cafe in New York, with my grandparents, and they did this like special touch where my brother and I ordered mac and cheese. We were splitting it, my parents would take us, but they would always be like, okay, you guys got to order off the kids menu. Obviously, they don't have a kids menu there. And we never would, because that wasn't the way we ate. But they'd be like, okay, you have to share it. And the way they presented it was, we weren't just kids. Like, they really treated us like adults. And I think that was something I always wanted as a kid, and I could find in restaurants that I fell in love with. And so from that point on, my grandparents would always send me news articles whenever Danny Meyer would be written up somewhere. And so up until they passed, I would get these like news clippings, which was a little like, I don't know what, a little funny, like having this under my bed of Danny Meyer. But it was quite silly. But I think following someone's career path who was kind of dedicated to hospitality and taking care of people, and a part of what made my experience at Beast and Bottle so special was Aileen Riley, the GM, also went to DU, and so we would just like read leadership books, or and then we'd just sit and debate them, and it was just like a very like fun, safe. I just felt like a part of their family, and we were always trying to push ourselves, and it was like always trying to learn more and really trying to reassess. Like I remember like an important conversation we had, which I've always referred to, is we were struggling. It was 2000. It was not too far off of the like real estate market crash, like, and we were trying to find the like ideal employee, and we just spent this time being like, who is this person that will thrive in this environment, who's going to enjoy it as much as we will, and just having so much fun, like pouring through our books and trying to figure out like what type of interview questions we need to be asking, how do we attract them, and how do we keep them happy. And that was something that they did really well at the TKRG group. Was the chefs never stayed in one role. Like there was obviously, like we ran service, there was lunch and dinner on the weekends, and the service, the shifts were often quite long, and so they would have like different, and you can imagine the attention to detail that goes into food. There was a lot of, I think there was actually like technically 3 different shifts for the chefs, and they were constantly rotating. That way they kept fresh, and they were on a new team, and they weren't necessarily needing, there's only so many roles and so many places you can go in a small kitchen, a small program, but they were trying to keep people happy and keep them growing and keep them there. And I thought that was really interesting and something that I tried to take with me, and that was something I loved that they did. And another part of the training process was they acknowledged everyone learned in a different way, which definitely was, I'm not someone that can just read something and go off and thrive in it. I like to talk through things. And so part of the training was you could read it, you could take a little quiz, and then you could have a conversation at the end of the night with your manager. And it was just this full kind of 360 training that felt like if you missed it in the reading it part, you'd maybe catch it in taking the test, and then if not, you'd have this conversation. It just felt like there was so much attention and focus on making sure, and like the seriousness around training and making sure that you were up to speed. And there's something kind of so uneasy about being a new employee in a new environment, and making sure people felt like they knew where everything was and knew there was so much lingo that I know in the wine industry we have a lot of lingo, but every set of plates had its own name, but it wasn't necessarily written on the plate or written down anywhere, and you had to just remember, and they were not always self-explanatory. It wasn't the name on the back of the plate, it was just sort of like a made-up name that you had to remember. And there was, because the plates had been around for so long, there were sometimes only a few, and I got to a point when I was working there where I would help work with the chef on trying to figure out what plates we would use each night, and you'd have to remember, and there was, we'd wrap it every night, and you just have to remember exactly how many of each plates, and you couldn't use the same. We had 2 10 to 15 course menus, so the vegetarian and kind of the main, and you couldn't repeat any plates, so you had to like remember, and it was all new. It's so funny how like the things that you wouldn't think that would be a challenge, but it was really something to overcome, and something to learn, and something to be passed down. And talk about oral history, there wasn't written down, you had to just share it with each other. But I think the thing that stuck with me the most was appreciation of the people that worked, like her partners, that the French Laundry wouldn't be where it was without, Sue Young, who made the beautiful Andante dairy cheese, and how another through line was that almost all the purveyors had day jobs or other things. They were originally in finance or law or dental, whatever it was, and then they fell into like the love of this craft. And that was something that stuck with me, that I love to this day, and try to bring to whatever place I work. So while I was working at the TKRG group, I met my now husband, and he left to work in wine with his family's winery, and we never saw each other. And I never in my life made decisions based on a relationship, but I'm glad I did, because I realized if I were to continue on the path of going into the leadership with the company, the hours are really late. You work very hard. It's really hard to have a life outside, and that is sort of something you give when you work somewhere like that you have a lot of fun when you're not there, but you're definitely your priority is the job, which kind of always is. But there's something different about working like a 12-hour shift and not having your phone. Like, it's sort of like you're really in it, which is really awesome environment, and something I mistakenly tried to apply when I first moved to Oregon to our environment here, and that did not go well for me. But he left into the wine, and I decided I should follow him into wine. So it was almost like I don't recommend making decisions off of like love, but it worked out, so it was good. It ended up working out. So the consultant that was working at the winery he was at knew of someone that was hiring, and kind of a funny story, like they were taking trash out, like they lived next to each other, and the founder of the winery that I ended up at was like, "Hey, do you know of anyone I'm hiring?" So I always like to think like how close I am to not getting the places that I ended up, and how like lucky I was that Lauren Van Ness happened to walk by Beast and Bottle, and that's how I ended up at Beast and Bottle, and then how RD just happened to be taking his trash out at the same time that Juan Mercado was, and ended up there. So anyways, long story short, I ended up at Realm Cellars, which was a fantastic education in wine. So Scott Becker and partnered in the project, and the company, the winery, like a lot of wineries, were not all financially successful. So it was in a challenging moment and desperately did need someone to come in. And Scott took this the aspect that Juan brought was really amazing relationships with vineyards. And so he had access to fruit like Dr. Crane and Beckstoffer, which are vineyards that are like iconic in Napa. And it's so funny to be away from Napa because no one really cares. But when you're in it, people care so much, and it's like means so much. And it's so funny to bounce from one wine world to another, and even from restaurants where things that mattered so much kind of in your world, less important. Anyways, but still very wonderful fruit and some of the best wines I ever drank. And it was such an amazing experience. I was only there for a year, but I think it was a really good place to be. Only if the people I met, and to be at a business that was, for all intents and purposes, failing and bankrupt, to turning it around. And one of the main differences, obviously quality, but that was always there. One was always making beautiful wine, but marketing. And that's something that we don't always talk about, that you don't always want to talk about because you're a guest, because that's sort of not sexy. And sort of like marketing has a way of like you're conning someone, or I don't know what the right word is, but they did a beautiful job of just telling the story, because all we're doing is telling stories of where wine's coming from and who, and Scott and his team do that so beautifully. If you haven't been to their website or read about it, it's like a very magical experience, I will say. And it was really fun and something that I have always kind of had a through line is working very closely with the owner or the founder of the business. So I got to do that at Beast and Bottle, which was so special. And then again at French Laundry, working directly with Michael Manila, the GM, and then Thomas Keller was my role that when I left was the head concierge, which again, talk about things that really don't matter outside of that. In the moment in there, it felt very important. Being the liaison between our partners, our 50 partners, and you can imagine a restaurant being around for 25 plus years, having 50 partners, they all have lots of people that want to come to the restaurant. And so managing that relationship and being the liaison and the connectivity between Thomas, them, and the restaurant, making sure everyone's well taken care of. And training and onboarding. And at the time, Talk was new, and I helped onboard Talk and went from Open Table to Talk. So I'm a Talk super fan and helped. I like to say that I helped to bring it to Oregon a little bit because I brought it to Domaine Roy, and we were one of the first people to take it on, and I have been kind of a loyal partner of theirs, not to be an advertisement for them, but these tools are really important, and they help you with hospitality and CRM, and you need all those tools in order to give that customer-facing experience. But having the relationship and seeing, there's something so special about seeing the person, like where the magic came from, and working very closely with them every day and helping to translate that to everyone else. And so that was something I got to do at both places. And with at Realm, Juan Marcato was the founder, and I got to work closely with him. He was the most humble. He was still like hosting people. So it was him, myself, and we had a director of hospitality who were hosting. It was such a different program than what I've seen. And the philosophy that I learned there is they both were like, we have our own book of clients. You have to go out and find your own. And I had a pretty high sales budget that I had to reach on just my own. It's kind of like a normal sales budget for a very large company here in Oregon, just because obviously the price point's different in Napa. And I was never used to just showing up and like having a desk job and just sort of plug and play. I've always was used to having to work outside the box, get creative, bring in customers. So that was something that I was used to. But obviously coming from French Laundry, we didn't have to do very much. We talked a lot about like a push or a pull company. That was a company where like the customers just came to us. Like we would release tickets, and we would watch Talk just book out for 2 months within 5 minutes, which was just like insane and pretty funny. When I launched other brands onto Talk, the same thing doesn't happen. That was kind of once in a lifetime thing. But going out and connecting with drivers and having that same focus of expanding like who those purveyors are and who support you, and building those deep relationships with the hotels, with the other wineries. And that's really what that was an aspect of the business I didn't expect, was the relationship building and the friendships and the connection, and how that can really help to drive your sales. So something that I loved so much was how I was able to play off of other people at other wineries and other restaurants to help actually like build my sale, that we like support each other and talk so highly of each other that the customer, by the time they got to you, they'd know a lot about you. And it sort of like, you spend an hour and a half with someone, and wine is so intimate, you leave kind of feeling like you know them better than you actually do. And wine has a way of doing that. And I always, it was a one-on-one experience. There was only one customer there at a time, and it was just such a wonderful way to learn, like doing hospitality at such a high level. I'd go out and greet them at their car, do lots of research on them before they came in, and do lots of, custom concierge type service for people. And it was really fun. Again, only there for a year, small blip on my life, but very impactful. And it's interesting because people that worked with me there went on to like write books about writing brands, and I've been on planes going to distributor events with owners of wineries here, and they're reading the books written by people that I worked with. And like, that's pretty cool to like in real time kind of see that happening and see people that the impact that one business that's kind of striving and pushing the limits can have outside of its boundaries. So ultimately, I loved my childhood here in Oregon. I can't say I spent too much time in vineyards in Oregon. I always thought I spent a lot of time on Savi's Island picking berries and biking, and my dream was to have a farm-to-table restaurant and to have a farm on Savi's and have a restaurant in Portland. But it's pretty funny how close Willamette Valley is and how I went to Shampooey Park a lot growing up, but I didn't quite make it to all the wineries, and I feel like quite silly because I would have loved to work there in the summers. But that being said, always knew I'd want to raise and have a family up here, and was very glad that my husband agreed to moving up here. And I came up on a trip to try to convince him to move up here, and I had a whole plan where we went to, I believe we went to Antica Terra, and then we went to a Blazer game, and then I took him to Luce in Portland, and then I took him apple picking, like in Mountain Hood. And I was like, I don't know if we did that all in one day, I can't really remember, but I was like, oh, and then we went to Coquine in Portland, and I was trying to, full court press, trying to get him onto our side, and it was pretty easy to convince him that this was a place to be. And when we were actually driving up here, moving, it was hard to leave Napa. We had such an amazing community, and I imagine you guys have this here living in McMinnville, where I don't have it so much living in Portland, that where everyone's kind of in the industry, and everywhere you go, to the grocery, to a restaurant, it's just this small town, and I definitely miss that. In Portland, it's nice to have all the things that Portland has, but I miss that really tight-knit community that you have in Napa that's so special. It exists in Oregon, it's just you got to work a little harder because we're a little more spread out, and obviously Willamette Valley being much larger than Napa's footprint. But as we were driving up, I was connected through my dad's law partner to Melissa Rondeau, who's Domaine Roy's consultant. She was one of their kind of first employees after Jared, and met with her a couple times, and she was like, I don't know if you are open to this. It's going to be a big project, but Domaine Roy is hiring, and she was originally trying to find me somewhere else, and ultimately connected me. The founders happened to be, and some of the managing partners happened to be in town, and set me up with an interview with them. And it was really interesting to kind of very quickly meet with Jared, fall in love with his philosophy. He, coming from Napa and Cab, and the way that Cab is made, and my philosophy of growing up in Oregon and dedication to sustainability and overall just care of the environment that you have. It exists in Napa, but the level that Jared, I'd never met with a winemaker who was so authentically obsessed with quality and with unapologetic commitment to making wine that was made with purity and transparency are two of the words we used to have written on a lot of our marketing, and I think that really nicely defines what Domaine Roy was in its origin. And I think immediately fell in love with that, and just how all guests can come down to every tour, every guest would come down into the cellar, and just the invitation, the warmth, and the architecture of the space was so stunning, and the wines, and just the way it felt like something I could easily get excited about, I guess. And then meeting the partners, they were obviously we had 25 partners, and the managing partners were all in Montreal, but they met with me actually at Domaine Serene in Portland, and it was to have both. They were successful. They own successful businesses that are outside of the wine industry, and this was a hobby passion project. And to be able to have such a dynamic conversation with them about, again, going back to leadership books, and they're trying to run these large businesses and trying to find ways to motivate their teams and to kind of stay competitive in the marketplace and how I could try to use that to apply it to the wine industry. And I remember our interview ran so long that their wives kept coming in being like, we're going to dinner, what's going on? And they were getting really annoyed. I thought I was going to lose the job because they were annoyed that I was talking so much. And but ultimately ended up working with them and having such like a wonderful experience, being the kind of, it was such a fun project to have people that trusted Jared and I, and to be able to have their full trust and to be able to be so nimble and take a business that had such good foundation, amazing product, amazing location, and kind of humanize it. I think when people try to build new brands and trying to build something that is, wine has a way of being stuffy, and especially if, like even just the name, people were always saying Domaine Roy or Domaine Roy, and I was like, however you want to say it. Like, you never want to start off with telling someone they're wrong. And so that was like one of the first things when I told people, like one of my first networking events I went to, people like stiffened when I told them where I worked, and I was like, okay, we gotta bring this back. Like in Napa, I would always have people over for dinner. It was like dinner parties. That's how I would build relationships and network and connect with people. And I was like, okay, I gotta we're all on the same team, and that's what Oregon is known for. And I think sometimes we've all felt this, like when that new winery opens up and they're trying to be shiny and like it's kind of intense and they're excited. It's like, it happens a lot. And I think that was us for a little while. Obviously now there's hundreds more wineries just on Warden Hill Road alone since then. But my goal was just to make it more kind of connect with the people and kind of tell the story of what was going on and kind of break down those walls that you can, some silly things like in Napa, a lot of the luxury wineries, they have a gate that's closed and you have to like call in to open the gate. And I was like, no gate. Gate's got to be open. Like, we got to be welcoming to people. And I think that was something that was really fun, was to bring this high level of hospitality, but make it Oregon. And there's people do not like pretentious, people don't like exclusivity. It's a lot of the stuff that worked really well in Napa does not work well here. And I think Jared, coming from Napa, but also we just worked well together, that we both sort of were on the same page and had the same dedication to quality. And it was so much fun coming in, and it was sort of like a clean slate coming in and building systems and creating a training program and sort of discovering all the exciting things that you can find at a winery that didn't have a manager for a little while. Kind of riding the train back on the tracks and honestly not knowing what I was doing and sort of learning by example was so much fun, and finding like-minded team members who wanted to work as hard as I wanted to make the business successful. And it was a lot of fun. My husband asked me like my 3 favorite things from my time at Domaine Roy, and it was like one random photo shoot we had where we invited, it was during COVID, and so we were trying to get content of people wearing masks and like things separated, but also knew that and hoped that this wouldn't be forever, so trying to get content of without masks. And it was just one of those beautiful Oregon evenings. We had 12 of our friends come out to be the models for the photo shoot, and Elliot cooked, and I think it's probably because I have all the photos to remember it, but it was just such a special night that really encompassed what the winery was, like bringing people together, cooking together, sharing that. I mean, that's what wine is all about, and that's really why I've fallen in love with this industry, and being able to share that with people. And you're kind of selling that to someone when they come and buy a bottle of wine. You're not just selling that one bottle of wine, you're selling that whole experience, to what it could be, what the evening could be if you take this wine home and you cook this recipe that I tell you about, or we like come together on, I don't know. So I think that's something, that photo shoot was something that was so special. And then I used to do wholesale for the brand along with running the winery, and I went to Texas for like a 2-week full state, like kind of onslaught. Like I'd never did wholesale very well with domain. It was something that again, learning through my own mistakes. But it was so fun to be in a state that I had a lot of preconceived notions and have that all be torn down for me, and how wonderful and hospitable everyone was, and how amazing the state is. And that was such an important thing, I feel like, for my life, to be like, you should not assume anything about anyone or any place, and you need to go into things open-minded. And really the hospitality, the dedication to wine, the care, I was blown away. And so that was something that was so special. I'm trying to remember the last one. But honestly, our last club party, I called in, we have a pretty small team now, or did, and I called in a lot of our alumni employees that I worked with over the years, and we had actually more of them than of our current team. And it was so fun to have a club member party with all these, past employees that really signed up a lot of the club membership, and to kind of come together. And it was a special, really special event. I love putting together those dinners. Wine, rarely do you drink wine on its own. You at least have a cracker, and it should be a good cracker if you're going to eat it. And I think wine should always be shared. And so I love putting together those events and bringing that all together.
So let's talk about, go back to Denver for a little bit. You mentioned kind of first experience and sort of the elevated but down to earth. Tell me about, I guess, learning at that level, learning hospitality at that level. You obviously had an interest in it, you had some experience in it, you had an education in it. What's different about doing it, and what was the draw for you to work as hard as you had to work to do that?
I think watching both my parents have their own business, they both were incredibly hard workers. I always joke that I was like the last to be picked up, and became very good friends with whoever else was the last person to be picked up, and often on the sidewalk when it was dark. And they were like, we're gonna have to leave you here. And I talked about like being under the desk of my parents, like watching them work very hard. It was sort of not an option. That was something I've always been around, people who work very hard and really love what they do, and really love their community that they work in. And so that was something that I was raised in. And I think sort of life is what you make of it. If you put a lot into it, you'll get a lot out of it. And very quickly, there's only one way to do hospitality, I feel like, is all in. Otherwise, it's sort of fake. And so I'm so glad that I had that gut feeling and that wake-up call that I could do the job at Domaine Roy and give them a call. Otherwise, I'd probably still be a host somewhere, which would be fine, but less interesting, maybe. And I'm really glad that I believed in myself. I think that's something, and I've been so lucky to work with a lot of people right out of college, and always try to support people and educate them, and try to be a mentor that I've been so lucky to have. And I think that was probably a big part of it, like working with the Rileys and their love and commitment, and their excitement and their joy. Like every day they were working really hard, but I've never laughed so hard or like had so many silly inside jokes I never knew it could be that much fun. And just from the music we would play to the family meals that we would have, to like we would do like a wellness week, which is so silly, and I would make everyone go do CrossFit and drink green juices. Like so silly, but that morale and that like connection with your community, it sort of makes you want to work really hard. I think I always say, like, I think what they taught me too, and what I now is like my philosophy, is when people come to your business, it's like they're coming to your home, and you're not going to give them a hug because that's inappropriate, but you want to make them feel like they're getting a hug when they walk in the door. And high level hospitality has a lot of organization on the back end that you have to greet them in a certain amount of time, that you can't sit there for a while. Everything has to be clean, from the parking lot to the bathrooms to the floorboards, to the menus, that if you sort of build people's trust, and that's something I learned a lot at French Laundry, that like you build their trust by hitting the mark every time. And the main difference between the French Laundry and any other restaurant is you are so focused on all those details, that the bathroom soap is, and there's a lot of systems in place to make sure nothing's missed. And I think it's probably pretty annoying to work with me now because I pay attention to all those details and they really matter to me. But I think that's how I was able to help make Domaine Roy profitable and attract, we weren't for sale, like when Frescobaldi came in, like to attract an outside, international buyer. And I think I'm so proud, even though that wasn't necessarily what we were going for, like I'm proud that I was helped to build a business to that. And I think that hospitality is warmth and generosity, but it's also having like really good systems on the back end and caring about, like I care so deeply about those small things. Like I always say in wine, yes, it's being in that moment, but you're not done until you've shipped that wine and they've opened the bottle. And there's so much that happens between them walking in the door, selling that bottle, and opening it. There's a lot that can go wrong. And I remember early on getting frustrated with their shipping partners because I felt like they weren't as, over the years they've totally evolved and I'm obsessed with them now, but that I felt like they weren't willing to go like break down a pallet to swap out a wine because a guest called and said they actually wanted a different wine. And for me, I was like, what do you mean? Nothing could be more important than getting them the right wine. And they've evolved and now they're, I feel like, more on our team. But I think just, I don't know, like the care for the guest and having fun and sort of getting them to talk about themselves and to learn about why they're there and being consistent. And I think that fun and that joy kind of flows over and people just want to be a part of it. And so we used to host a lot of like themed dinners, and I got to work on Sundays. I would work like a double work brunch, and then I would kind of be the somm and the manager and do inventory at night and work the bar and be the somm. And it was so much fun being able to bartend. Like that is the job for me. Like bartending is you're just sitting there chatting with people, making beautiful drinks, and they're right in front of you. Like when someone's at a table, you have to leave, but when you're bartending, they just kind of stay, which is really fun, and you get to just have actual conversations with them. So that was probably my favorite, was those Sunday nights. And Sundays, the owners weren't there, so I got to be the head honcho, I guess, and so I enjoyed that too, I think. And yeah, I think working with people that love what they do and kind of conveying that is the best way to put it. But also like never having a stain on your shirt or having a backup one in your car if you do stain it. And so like cleanliness is important, I guess. It's just silly, but attention to detail. And also if you make a mistake, like being quick to reacting with a guest. So let's say like, something small, like you cooked the eggs wrong, they wanted sunny side up, or you overcooked it. Like something we did, and I learned from the Four Seasons and how they run their hotels, is like empowering your employees. So this is so silly, and I don't even want to say it out loud, but we had like BA bucks because we were Beast and Bottle, we had a lamb on our sign. I don't know why I came up with that. I'm embarrassed, but it was a way for them. It was empowering the team that they could use up to a certain amount of money to like win back a guest or to surprise and delight them, or they were coming in for an anniversary or a birthday, or they messed up on something. No questions asked. You could, send an extra splash of wine, send a mini cocktail, a dessert, whatever. And I think, yeah, that was a bad name. No one really liked that. but I was into it. I don't know. Finding ways to like empower your team to fix it in the moment. My least favorite thing is I need to go talk to my manager because I'm like, ugh, like it just seems like you're bringing your mom into it or like you're tattletaling. I don't know. And I think everyone should always feel like they're talking to the most important person at the company and that they can fix it in that moment. And I think that was something I learned there, or at least, yeah.
So the opportunity to work at the French Laundry, as you mentioned, like obviously a very different place and a very unique place. When you were presented with the opportunity, was it something you immediately were like, yes, I have to do this, or was there some trepidation about making that move?
I was so unsure. I was always anti-white tablecloth, so it was like everything I kind of was against, and I weirdly had never heard of Thomas Keller before. Like it wasn't on my radar. Alice Waters was like my idol. I think I just focused on her and Chez Panisse and everything that I loved, everything she did with the education of farming and with students and accessibility. And yes, I was concerned. I also thought I should work in wine. And I had an uncle that had a winery in Napa, and I went to go interview there with his son. And I came wearing my suit from the French Laundry, and he was like, "What are you doing? Like, we don't wear suits here." And it was like the interview actually didn't go well, and it was with like a relative, and yeah, not by marriage, but not, yeah. And it was pretty funny to go from an environment. I felt I really clicked with the GM, and I say a lot of the things that he said, like, don't let the guests get in the way of their own fun. Was like his favorite thing. He loved to say that, like the story better than anyone. If they're telling you they're dairy free, but they actually eat ice cream, then just like let them have some butter. Like they're gonna be okay. Like don't let them ruin their own fun. Like you know where this can end. Obviously, if someone's like truly like, please, I cannot have dairy, like don't give them dairy. But there's, I don't know, there's probably better examples than that one. But I think, I don't know, I just had more fun in the interview. So that was a big thing. And, but it's funny how a lot of people in my life told me not to work there because they knew the environment that places, they didn't want me. And I guess it did cool me off of wanting to own a restaurant. One of the main things was my dream was to always open a restaurant here in Portland. And I have always been a really hard worker. And I thought at this level, I was looking around and there were a lot of really hard, really dedicated people, but there also were people that I felt weren't, they weren't living and breathing it. And I was like, wow, if I'm at this level and not everyone's living and breathing it, and a lot of people it is just a job. I learned, and ultimately a lesson I continued to learn is that unless you are the owner, not everyone's going to be as bought in. And I think that's okay. And I've come to be like, it's okay if for your team and your employees that it is just a job. You just still want them to make the most of it. And I think that, cooled me off a bit from it. But it was an incredible experience, and I did actually get to meet Danny Meyer there, which was fabulous. So that went well for me. And I did get to be a part of the leadership team, and really just the fun and the joy that people had, even at that level, like the silliness and the play that can happen amongst employees. Even though we weren't allowed to talk to each other on the floor, it was supposed to be about work. It was supposed to be very focused, quiet, focus on the guests. If it's side talk, it's not really the place for it. I mean, there's so much going on. There's so many details. If you're like off talking about something, you could very easily derail someone, and I totally understand that. And I think, so finding like silly kind of non-verbal ways to have fun and like kind of play with your coworkers throughout the shift to make it lighter was also really fun. And the relationships that we built, obviously I met my husband there, but like the other relationships outside of him are still some of our closest friends, kind of being in the trenches and having that level. And now whenever I meet anyone that's worked for any of any restaurant at that level, it's like you can speak the same language, you kind of understand each other, you have that commitment and that work ethic of just the job isn't done till it's done, and you're kind of like, there's no room for like being selfish or to complain. It's like you're here to do something excellent. And so if you don't want to do that, then don't come. I don't know, like show up with your A game, which is kind of a fun place to be, I guess, too. But ultimately, I'm so glad that I did work there. And I think the most important thing I took away was just respecting and honoring the people that allowed you to get here. So like honoring those farmers and honoring the legacy. Like Thomas bought the restaurant from the Schmidt family, and so not a lot of people know that he didn't just open it. And so he honored them to the utmost respect, that they planted an apple tree out front, and this apple tree was like doted on, like no apple tree I've ever seen, and it would only give us like sometimes 5 apples a year. And it was these beautiful like pink pearl apples that the inside is pink and like gorgeous. And we would make like 1 chilled soup for 1 VIP. And like carrying that soup, you're like, I better not drop this. Like this is really important. And I think having that love and care and appreciation and that ability to like respect and honor, and that's really all we do in wine too. And as our industry starts to grow and we do start to see outside investment, like having respect and honor for those founders is so important. That's like the reason why we're all here. And I think that's something that's so important, especially like on Warden Hill Road and in such a special place, that we have to honor the people that laid the groundwork for us to get here and appreciate them and make sure as we are growing our businesses that we're doing it with respect to how we got here in the right way, I guess.
So you talked about the Domaine Roy opportunity coming along, and obviously you'd been in upper management in restaurants, hadn't been in upper management in a winery yet. So I'm curious about that in terms of sort of a jump for you. But I'm also curious to describe for me or us what Domaine Roy looked like when you joined it. What did it have, and what did it need? So
when I started, I'm usually a pretty good negotiator. I really wanted to do national sales. I had like idolized that. I had a friend who was doing national sales at a Fela in Sonoma, and loved, like, she was traveling around. It seemed like the most amazing job. So everywhere I was interviewing, that was what I wanted. I really wanted to work with Maggie, and I interviewed with her, and I was like so gung-ho about it, but ultimately she was like, no one gets on a plane but me. And I was like, that's amazing. And now I'm like, wow, no wonder your brand is so special and so iconic. And you are the one. You're like, you made the story, and then you're gonna tell the story. Of course, like every somm throughout the country is hearing it from her, and they're able to convey that to the guests. That's how you build a brand. And at the time I was like, oh, I want to represent your brand for you. But I get it now so well that like that's why they are who they are. And I think I was sort of like blinders on, really wanting to do this wholesale thing. And at Domaine Roy, they really needed a tasting room manager. And so I came on as West Coast sales and hospitality. Like I can't even remember, but there wasn't well, I guess technically Jared was the GM, but you can imagine like being a winemaker and a GM is very hard. And as the winery started to grow, and the brand started to grow, that was impossible to ask that of one person. And we had one managing partner who was on site who was helping with a lot of the finance, so he was the CFO. And so when I was hired, I was told that we were like 3 pillars, and there was like a Venn diagram, I guess, how we all work together. And you can imagine that can be hard because no one was in charge of, there was no hierarchical environment, and we were all just together. And obviously I was very fresh and very green, but also I've been referred to as like, I have like an intensity about me, very type A, very direct, and so I came in just like guns a-blazing. I know you're supposed to come in and be quiet for 90 days when you start a job, but I was like, ooh, we can't do that here. We got to get going. Just coming from an environment of, needing to label everything and the cleanliness and finding, there was, as you can imagine, a place that was really focused towards quality, but didn't have enough people in all the roles. And I think that was something that was amazing and challenging, to be an environment at a winery where we were striving to be excellent, but we didn't necessarily have, we never had a club manager and a shipping, you look at other, people always say we're the largest cottage industry where no two brands are formed the same way. You can't, there's no this is how you run a winery. These are the roles that you have. We all have the longest titles in the wine industry, and we all wear a lot of hats. But without doing that, I think it was really fun to be able to go in, and I think simple stuff like inventory, the way SKUs were listed, and SKU management was something, I don't know, consistency on that was important. Something I brought in. Something we did and was really important at TFL, which I always brought to where I worked, which I realized maybe is less important in wine, but I was really dedicated to it, was maintaining a record of the menus so you knew what people were poured last time they were there. And I was really obsessed with that when I first got there. And I had this formula for how you would write a CRM, where you'd write obviously everyone's name and a little blurb about them, but then what they drink. And because I really wanted to make sure that we didn't pour them the same thing, or we got to learn their taste and their palate. It was really important to learn where they like to sit, what their dog's name and kid's name. The thing in hospitality is, in order to be warm and gracious and welcoming, and an environment where there's constant turnover, is you have to have really good CRM. And so that was my whole life at TFL, and something that I brought to Domaine Roy, a big thing, was just these systems and things that just weren't there before, and giving the team time for that. So focusing on having individual roles where people were focused on, if you're a salesperson, I want you to be able to do everything sales, and I don't want you to be bogged down by having to polish glassware or having to restock. So having a dedicated person who's in that support role was important, to allow the salespeople to really kind of shine and thrive. And something that's sort of, I guess, something I gleaned from TFL, that there was, the captain, a back waiter, a food runner, and a somm, and there was something doing each role, so you could do it very well. And that way you're a captain would only have 1 to 2 tables. I mean, that's kind of crazy in a lot of restaurant settings, such a small section, but that's something I really kind of held through, that especially coming from Realm, having that one-on-one experience, being able to sit down. And I was instructed to actually drink with the guests, which was insane. I mean, I spit, but still, to have that much wine kind of going in and out of your body every day, my teeth will never be the same. Having cab for a year, but I think I didn't quite go that far, but I would ask our team to really spend time with the guest, and that your responsibility is to build a relationship with them. Everything else will get taken care of. And then creating fun training programs, which I was sometimes better at than others. You can imagine it's hard to consistently do the same thing at a high level ongoing year after year, but that's what makes the place excellent. But having training, doing lots of team outings, going wine tasting, trying to cook for them as much as possible and show them how special sharing the wine is, and being together.
You mentioned that the idea of selling was not something that was a goal, but was something that came about because the place became palatable, became exciting. So tell me about the process of finding yourself for sale and going through that.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was on maternity leave, and I came back, and my first day back was in a law office with the new owners. So it was quite the surprise, but it is exciting, and I know why they did it. We had 25 original investors, and you can imagine what that would look like if everyone was to pass that down in their will. This was probably not going to be a legacy brand that was passed down to children. That would become very complicated very quickly. And they were wonderful. I know like Canadians have this stereotype of being very wonderful, generous, warm, but my gosh, like the warmth and the kindness that I got from our founders was amazing. And we had more active partners and ones that were not as active, but they all just loved Oregon and loved the wine industry, and it was very sweet to meet them. And they were just really excited by a legacy brand coming and noticing. I mean, that's sort of, there's a lot of ways a winery can age, and I think this is a pretty good one, a pretty good story. And it's something that we're seeing is more and more common. And I wasn't afraid of something like this happening, because being in Napa, like watching a lot of brands sell, and it can mean a lot of things. But usually it meant the team got better benefits, and like it wasn't always bad. It wasn't something to be afraid of, even though there was, like, from a consumer side or from like an industry side, there's sometimes this like, oh, this happened. It's sometimes not always seen as such a good thing, but I think it is something that happens, I guess. It's part of life. And I studied abroad in Perugia, and so I've always been, I mean, I don't know who is a fan of everything Italian, but I was very excited, and we totally aligned on kind of the goals for the winery, and I was really excited about the partnership and everything. So it was a really fun 2 years to learn. I sort of got to stay in my same job, but like get a new job in a way, because a whole new, like everything around me changed. You know, I all of a sudden had a very active boss, which I had always operated sort of on my own, and I was sort of just relaying, you know, financial reports and sort of not really ever having to ask permission, which was very much a new thing, and good for me, because you should learn how to have a boss. That's a good thing. And I worked with a lot of really amazing, wonderful people, and obviously the challenge of time differences, just like logistics, that a lot of wineries and people are dealing with now is interesting. And conveying like what Oregon is and who our customer is and what our employees are, that was like a big part of my job, and explaining that, which was interesting. Yeah.
So I'm curious about the kind of your own personal wine education. You mentioned early on it became something you were very interested in, and did the CMS work, and I'm curious about both from a sort of palate side and also just from an education side. How did you learn about wine, and what did you find, I guess, exciting about learning about wine? Yeah,
I mean, wine is so intimidating. I think my first class was in, like, study was in, I guess it was, I think technically when I was studying abroad, I had a food and wine class, and we would go out. I mean, it was like heaven. I can't believe I got to do that. And we were like in Italy, and we're traveling around, and we're going to wineries, and we're learning about, you know, seeing where the wine is made, and that was part of my class. It was honestly incredible. And then I came back and had more of like a structured pairings class and how to develop a menu, but also talking about how the wine was made. And so I've had enough, again, to like be dangerous and think I knew what I was talking about. But as I got into the wine world, it's very easy to quickly be like, oh, I always assume I know the least amount to anyone. And that's sort of the way I operate when it comes to wine. But I was around a lot of wine nerds at Beast and Bottle, and they kind of encouraged me to go through the Court of Masters. And I am not a good test taker, and I don't enjoy studying. Like, I love school, but I didn't like that part of it, which is a big part of it. And that's sort of all that wine education is. But when it got to like the maps and just taking like a bowl of fruit and smelling it, or like running around the house and trying to find like, what is this smell in this wine? And like going through perfumes and deodorant and trying to be like, lavender. Like, of course I should know that now. But I think I loved it. I probably would have pursued studying more, but when I got to French laundry, that was sort of, you can imagine an environment where I was cranking out so many master somms, and like the kind of, I want to say this in the best way possible, but like personality that would come with that, and kind of like what would change, that Thomas sort of Keller started to honor and respect the court, but also have kind of cool off on wanting to deal with that personality type. And so it wasn't really encouraged, and it was sort of like, I was there in a transition where it was the first time we didn't have an MS. So I'm going to totally forget his name, but he was fabulous. And Dennis Kelly, I worked with him for a very short amount of time, and he went on to open a project in Pasadena, or Palo Alto, excuse me, before Eric Johnson took over the project. And he was like the ultimate, worked his way up from Bouchon as a coffee server to like head som at TFL. It's like kind of iconic. And he was the most humble, like down to earth, no certification. Like wine is just talking with people. So that was sort of my hard education of like, just connect with the people. Don't focus on the certification. And now on Tuesday, my last day at Domaine Roy, I was working an event for Deloitte, and I was alongside Claire from Big Table Farm and Jillian from Bergstrom, and we were like impromptu, had to give a presentation, and the topics were like overall general history of Willamette Valley, why Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and how to properly drink wine. And mine was like, why Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And I got up there along these two very well-educated, very well-respected women in front of a room of 200 people. And I'm like, okay, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And I'm like, oh, I wish I had my W set. Like, I did the best I could. And I think I gave a room full of people that were really new to the wine industry a good synopsis. But I think, personally, I need a little more of the deep, but I feel like I don't want it to get in the way of the people. And it's important to have all the facts and all the information, but it's pretty, like for me, boring to go to a wine tasting and just have someone like pelt you with facts, and then to be like, where am I? Like, who owns this place? Like, what's the philosophy behind it? And that's really what's so interesting. But I did love learning all about the different wine regions. And I mean, I had like a little library in my office when I first started, and it dwindled because I would give away all the books to employees and be like, I would encourage everyone to, we had like an education stipend that I kind of put into place. And I think education is like empowering, and especially it's a quick way to be able to sit in a room and to feel like you can have a seat at the table. And I think especially with the court and masters being able to take that test and be in a room with master somms even like on the day of the test, and to learn all those banker scents and like why, how you know you're drinking a Syrah. It's like really easy when you're in Oregon. It's like all Pinot and Chardonnay, and that's your entire world. And that is my entire wine collection at the moment. A little bit of champagne, and but I'm excited to kind of dive into other varietals. I'm a huge Riesling, Gewürztraminer. There's not a wine I won't try and don't love, but I mean, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are such special, iconic grapes that can be made in so many different ways that I don't think I'll ever cool off on them. I mean, they're so special. And Chardonnay is, we're so lucky to be living in this time in Oregon when so much good Chardonnay is coming out of, and sparkling programs. I'm amazed by how many brands are coming out there and just the quality, which is amazing, and people starting to champion other varietals. I mean, there's room for all of it on the shelf, and I think, but from a wine education, I think it's something I hunger for more. I definitely had to get more into the logistics, and like sort of legal compliance aspect was a big part of my world. But I would personally like to dive more into it. Being able to properly and adequately speak for 5 minutes in a room of 200 people about Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. I think it's a good measure of that. But yeah.
For sure. I think it's a nice. You should be able to convince people pretty easily that Pinot Noir and Chardonnay are pretty good,
Yes.
and this is a good place to drink them.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm curious about you've talked obviously throughout the through line of your kind of life has been hospitality, has been sort of service and all of those things. So I'm curious now, having worked at high-end restaurant and worked at a boutique winery that was a high serving. Is it different? Is the wine industry different in any way when it comes to hospitality? And if so, what is sort of what's the biggest thing? What's different about a winery than a restaurant or any other kind of hospitality?
Well, I would always say that I wanted to. It's so funny because I love people and I love hospitality, but the reason why I didn't want to work in hotels was you're like with the guests for so many days and you like can't get away from them. Whereas like in a restaurant, it's like, let's have some fun for 2 to 3 hours and then off we go. Winery is like a total like thing in the middle where it's so much more personal. Even though food people are putting in their body, I don't know anything where people are more attached and connected. When someone joins your winery or becomes a fan of your wine brand, it is taking up real estate in their house. They're sharing it with their friends and family. It's like they're celebrating it. They're buying bottles on their children's birth years to save for 20 years until they can drink it. I mean, especially like we would host weddings at Domaine Roy. I mean, my goodness, like that's one of the most important times in someone's life. And I think the relationships that you build, they're so long term. And I think that's something I learned how to really take care of people in that way at the French Laundry, and how some of these people had been going there for years, like once a year, and they would save up. I mean, another thing I learned at French Laundry was that you would have people who would save up for years to come there, and then people where this is just like a casual lunch and it's no big deal. But each person got the same high level of hospitality and service. Not something I brought to Domaine Roy, that I'm like, it doesn't matter if they're 12 people sharing a bottle of rosé or they're, a referral from another high-end winery here hosting a heritage tasting, $100 tasting. They should all be treated the same and all leave with the same love and respect from us. And I think that's something that's, so important. And making sure that everyone feels welcome. I don't know. It's very important to me.
You talked a little bit earlier about sort of the growth in Oregon, obviously, since you've been here. Tell me about kind of your initial impressions of the wine industry here as you got to know it, and how you've seen it evolve, I guess, since you've started paying attention.
I think the trope that's in all the textbooks is that we all work together, which I cannot say, like, I've had the most special experiences with that, especially with our neighbors Furioso, like sharing wine glasses or, bottling like ladders. I mean, little things where you're right in the moment and you're so desperate and your neighbor like can grab a cup of sugar from them. Like I can't tell you how many times we've reached out a hand and there was always someone there to answer. And the community here is beyond special. It's unlike anything. I know I spoke about Napa and how that closeness and that tight knit, but there's like that was like on a personal level, where this is like a professional level of respect and camaraderie, and we're all here trying to get eyes on Willamette Valley. People rarely just drink one wine or have just one type of wine in their cellar. That's sort of odd. That would be weird. And there's room for all of us. And I think that's something that makes Oregon so special. And obviously, we've felt the increase in wineries on our road and increase of competition at Domaine Roy. When I first started, we'd see like 30 people on a Saturday. I grew it to us seeing like 200 people on a Saturday, and now we're seeing like 60 to 80. Like you can imagine the expectation of hitting those same sales goals as you once did, and to it's probably got tiring to hear that I'm like, well, there's just a lot of great places for people to go, and there's not as many customers. So that's something that I'm curious to see where we end up at the end of this. I think we're at the edge of something maybe challenging for the wine industry, and we've sort of seen for the first time that places are closing, roles are being eliminated, there's changes that are happening. It's tight, our customers are tightening, we're tightening, and I think we'll all end up being better for it, because the strong and the highest quality competition is good for the market and good for the consumer, but it will be sad. And it's also sad because I think a lot of people are probably looking to sell soon, because you put so much into a wine brand, you don't really make that much money every year. If you are lucky, you're covering your costs or maybe a little more. It's not like sort of the big payout is at the sale, and there's going to be a lot of brands that are for sale, and I hope that we have a new round of investment in people that want to come here. Or maybe even the land will have good value, and so that will be helpful, or people can pass it down to family. But a lot of those small brands, I think not everyone wants to be in wine. And yeah, I'm hopeful for the industry. I think we will end up in a better place, but I think it's going to be like a rocky time, and I think we all have to continue to support one another and to work hard. And I think what's hard is to have buildings that are for sale, because it sort of it's like we overbuilt a little bit, is sort of my feeling. And that's hard when there's I'm such an architect fanatic, and when there's buildings that weren't built with as much care, to have them be empty just sitting there is sort of wasteful, I guess. But I don't know how to fix that. There's no real cure to that. Just having bad taste is sort of painful for the neighborhood, I guess. I don't know. But I think, I don't know. I think we're ultimately still some of the brands that are out there and the people that have come onto the scene are making such high quality wine that I am really hopeful that they can just become lean and kind of weather the storm. Wholesale's struggling. It's sort of it's going to these industry meetings is sort of depressing sometimes, and they blame millennials a lot. And I'm sitting here being a millennial, I'm what are you talking about? I drink plenty of wine, and everyone I know drinks plenty of wine. We're doing our job. We're doing the most we can. We just, within reason. I think the excess that once was that helped fuel the industry is not there, and that probably wasn't good. Probably need to redirect and drinking responsibly, and only opening one bottle of wine for a couple on a, having a dinner party or just over for dinner. That's okay, because you have to wake up early, take care of your kids, and you don't want to be hungover. I think this is good for everyone. We just have to kind of shift, and I think putting the focus back on that community and wine is brings people together, and it's not, as some articles have kind of told us, that it's this horrible cancer-causing thing. I think there's a lot of other things that we put into our body that aren't regulated and aren't getting articles written about that. It's pretty damaging when that happens, and so I think we just all have to be creative on combating that and coming together to communicate. I don't know if I would go as far as saying the health benefits, but community, bringing people together, enjoying something, having a pairing. I mean, I can't tell you how special it is to have a bottle that you've aged for 10 years and to bring it to your friends, and the feeling that you can feel amongst each other that I've cared for this bottle, I selected it this many years ago, and I'm choosing tonight to enjoy it with you. That you can feel around the table is something, I don't know, it's a little gift you're giving to everyone, and that's how you build deep relationships and friendships, at least how I do. So I don't know. I think hopefully we'll be able to come out being more competitive, higher quality, better service for our guests, and better product, hopefully.
Your talk of architecture gave me a thought that maybe there could be like a winery HOA that you could be in charge of.
Oh, no, no one would want that.
You could go and measure it.
Yeah.
So tell me about what's next for you.
Yes, so I am really doing a lot of self-reflection. I'm never really not had a job, so it's new for me. It's been like less than a week, but I'm still like, what's next? But I think I've always been really passionate and like been a part of Salud, and so I think I want to reach out to them, connect to see if there's any way I can help out, and just reaching out to other organizations that are, we're gonna have a really intense harvest and time, everything with ice and everything that's going on. It's such a new challenge to our community, and I think we have to all come together to support one another and find ways to keep people safe, and I would love to help out in any way I can on that front. And then personal career path, I love coming in and like being a fixer and being a part of a small project and being lean and being able to, I think that's what made us so successful and to be profitable during the COVID years, and to really build a brand from 200 to 1,000 club members, and to make us from less than $1 million to like, 3 million in sales. Like, to really have that massive growth, you need to be able to have people that are listening to the customers, listening to the employees, and able to be agile and nimble. And that was the really fun part of those early years at Roy that I loved and thrived and was able to catapult us into this place of like success. And I think finding a brand that will allow that creativity to thrive and are excited about the Oregon experience and curious about listening to that customer, because the customer's needs are always changing. It feels like if you're listening closely, like more than the trends change pretty quickly, and I think being able to adapt to them is important. And I think being overly rigid and being like, if we build, they will come, scares me, because I don't know if that will happen always. I think you need to create an environment that people want to be in. And so finding the right team for that will be important. But I've found all my jobs through just sort of, I don't know if it's luck or just connecting with people. And so while I am already spending a lot of time on, all the sites, I think that's where I'll find people, is find the next thing is through connecting. So I have lots of lunches planned this week, and networking is important. So I'll find it.
And you want to stay in wine?
I love wine, and I love people, and I do love restaurants. So something wine adjacent. There's the lure sometimes of like the tech, customer service side of things, but I think I would probably get bored of that unless I just love being with people. And a big part of my job was like creating a place where people wanted to work and kind of inspiring and motivating a team and making them feel good every day. And then they could make the guests feel good, and then they would make the owners feel good because they would be spending money. So I think getting into that loop again will be good for me. But I do live in Portland. I have 2 little ones. The commute is a real thing. So there are some wineries in Portland that could be interesting, or Sherwood, closer to home, but we'll see. We'll see. I think I'm very lucky to have built lots of good relationships and have faith in the whole thing. So, yeah.
Last question for you. Biggest accomplishment so far, or thing you're proudest of?
I know it's silly, but I'm so proud of all the team members that came through Domaine Roy and where they ended up. And I think that's something that makes me so excited to see them running their own programs, or being able to be wherever they are. Like, for me, those relationships, that's the thing I'm most proud of. And to have people that were able to make a career out of hospitality and make it financially feasible and able to buy a home for their family from working with you, I think that makes me feel so proud. And the texts that I got from people kind of reaching out about the news, I think they just, the support and how appreciative they were for the time I gave them, that is like what I'm most proud of, is those relationships. And like being a true mentor, I think, is, because then you're kind of improving the overall industry and the community, and that's kind of what it all is. Yeah.
All right, all the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have, or anything we didn't cover today that you wanted to cover?
I think it was like a little bit of a therapy session, working through it all. It was good. Yeah, it was good. Thank you.
Yes,
yeah.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you taking the time, sharing your story with us. Looking forward to seeing what the next chapter is for you. And go ahead and let you off the hook.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.